Welcome to Round the Table. I'm Ben John from Christian Concern and the Wilberforce Academy. It's great to be with you again. Please do make sure that you put into the comments where you're from. It's always been great each week being able to engage with supporters and followers and speak to you and really engage with you during this lockdown that we've been through. Today, we're going to be wrestling with questions about conversion therapy and the idea that we're born that way regarding sexuality and sexual orientation. Delighted to have my colleague Carys Moseley, policy researcher at Christian Concern, and special guest Sam Salter. Hi, Sam. It's great, and Carys, it's great to have you both on. Everyone, please do make sure that you put in your comments and your questions. We love engaging with you and hearing with you. So please do make sure you put that. It's great to see you. Hi, Nigel. Hi, Victor. It's great to have you, and it's amazing to see the international, not just national, but the international viewership that we've been getting. So please do say hello in there. Some of you may have heard that on Monday evening, Parliament, as a result of a petition which garnered over 200,000 signatures calling for a ban on so-called conversion therapy, a debate happened in Parliament on Monday evening where many MPs called on the government to ban so-called conversion therapy. And this ban possibly could result in mere pastoral guidance, prayer, counts, talking therapies being banned for Christians and non-Christians, for those with unwanted same-sex desires. So it's important that we understand and know how we should respond to this. So it's great that we can have Sam on, who can share a little bit about his story and what he has been through. Sam, 2 or 3 years ago, what were you doing? What was happening for you?
So yeah, well, just over two years ago now, I was in a relationship with another man, and we've been in a relationship for 4.5 years approximately. And I basically came across some information that really blew my mind, and it forced me to reconsider that my relationship wasn't really good for me. And I decided to break up with my partner. I loved him a lot. But he became like a best friend to me, and I had to go through that breakup process with him. I decided to move back to my hometown and kind of start a journey on trying to discover what had really gone wrong and why, and where my relationships had gone wrong, why I was struggling to function, and just exploring the idea that I wasn't actually born gay, and trying to see if I could undo any traumas that I believe were associated with my sexuality.
So you kind of identified in your own life, you could see, pursuing that lifestyle wasn't fulfilling or wasn't satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came out when I was 15. I came out as bisexual when I was 15 because I knew I was sexually attracted to men, but I was also romantically attracted to women, and I'd had a crush on a friend, a female friend at school, and it was purely romantic. And I knew I had the potential maybe to pursue a relationship with a woman, but I kind of put that on the back burner. And throughout going through my teenage years and my 20s, I really kind of struggled to just get along in life. I found it difficult to hold down a job. I found it difficult to keep friends around. And I just felt as well that in my relationship, on the surface, we had so much fun, and it seemed like a healthy relationship to anyone kind of on the outside looking in. But I knew deep down there was a kind of undercurrent of dissatisfaction. At the beginning of our relationship, I was looking at other men, and I recognized that was something that was a recurring theme with me. I was always wanting something else. There was always something better around the corner. But as we go through the conversation today, I'll get a bit more into about how that, why that manifested. But yeah, ultimately, I just felt that this gay identity was it, I felt like I was regressing in life. I wasn't really moving forward and growing. I felt like I was regressing into this kind of helpless child almost. But yeah, we'll obviously get into that.
Well, maybe if we do go back, and maybe you could just share a little bit about your journey growing up. You mentioned being attracted to men, but romantically attracted to women. Maybe just share a little bit about that journey growing up and some of the things that you experienced in your childhood.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, when I said about the romantic attraction, it was more to do with, I mean, it was a very slight romantic attraction, and I kind of, like I said, I put that on the back burner, and I kind of thought, this isn't really working for me. You know, I was rejected a lot by girls, romantically. But yeah, going back to childhood, I think I won't go into full details, but ultimately, I grew up in an environment. I mean, my dad abandoned me when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I had my mum around and my stepdad. And you know, bless when I refer to my parents, I'm always talking about my mum and my stepdad. Bless them. They were young. They were very young. I was the eldest, and I think I, I essentially I grew up in an environment where I felt like I had to hide away a lot, and I think by the time I got to school, you know, being with other boys in school, it seemed to me like they had this kind of edge that I didn't have, and I think I'd missed out a little bit. And so, you know, the boys to me were a bit foreign. They were, I found them to be inconsiderate. I thought they were rude. I thought they were critical. I didn't relate to the way they played, you know, pushing each other around and stuff like that. I didn't get it. I was soft in that sense. So I decided I didn't want to be like the boys. And I also then, you know, as a result of that, the boys saw me as other to them, and I was rejected by them. You know, I was called names and things like that. And the girls were the people that took pity on me. At the same time, when it came to my family, like I said, I wasn't close with my parents, but I was always around women. So whilst I felt like there was an element where I couldn't really truly relax and be myself, I also felt like I had to mold myself to the women in my family to gain their respect. You know, I would on a Saturday afternoon, I wasn't with, you know, my stepdad or my dad or even my uncles or my grandfathers, but I was always with my mum at her grand's house, and my mum has few sisters, so that, you know, my aunties would always be around, and and so I was really living in this very feminine environment socially. And I think, you know, by the time puberty comes, and this is what the psychology and the literature says, had so I was so kind of enmeshed with the female um, side of society, that I then saw men as something other that I wanted to um, to connect with. You know, I had a desire deep down in my heart to connect with these men that had rejected me all this time, that it becomes sexualized.
So in a sense, there was a kind of a hole you feel when you were growing up, and something was really missing because of that environment that you grew up in. And so, and the sexualization is a fruit and a symptom of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. That's it. It's you know, we when we have, you know, we as Christians, we understand that men and women are two halves of a whole, and that's all this is. But my identity was kind of was stuck over with the women a little bit, and I wanted to rejoin the masculinity that I missed out on. And I do believe as well that I think I've not read into this much, but I do believe that all children go through a developmental stage where, you know, it's an imperative that they need to relate to their own gender in order to develop a stable sense of self. And so really, homosexuality was a way for my body to try and reconcile the fact that there was this kind of split in my personality in that sense.
Okay, well, it's such powerful you kind of sharing that. What would you say, Sam, to someone who says, you know, people are born gay, and what we're talking about now is, or for you, is just internalized homophobia?
Yeah, so I respect that people want to say that they're born gay. I used to say I was born gay as well because it's such a deep feeling. I mean, when I was 4 years old and I watched Disney films, I could relate to Jasmine more than Aladdin, for example. So I get it. I get that you feel like it's all you've ever known. Because again, it's an identity problem, and the gender identity phase of childhood is around that kind of age, about 4, 5, 6 years old. So yeah, I respect that people say they're born gay, but the thing is, there's just no proof that people are born gay. We know that from twin studies. There was a study of an Australian database of twins, thousands of twins, and they took this database of all these twins and they analyzed how many of them were gay versus how many were straight, and they found that I'm sorry to say, I can't remember the percentage, a very low percentage, about 11%, I want to say. 11% of gay people in that study had a gay twin. Only 11%. And these are identical twins. So that tells us no, they're not born this way. And so we have to explore nurture rather than nature.
Carys, you've done a lot of sort of research on this issues, particularly on the sort of campaigning side. Where do you think that this born this way sort of ideology has kind of come from, and how has it grown to be so prominent?
It's been built as a campaigning tool. I mean, when I go back with decades, I've looked at the archives of the Wolfenden Committee, the people who gave evidence to the Wolfenden Committee on Homosexual Offences and Prostitution, which was run by the Home Office in the 1950s. And a lot of mental health professionals turned up and talked about these issues. They didn't talk about twin studies. They hadn't been done at that time. And a lot of the questioning of the mental health professionals, remember that it was a crime to act as a homosexual man at the time, but they asked, can people change? And a lot of the professionals reported, yes, their clients kind of do change, and they mentioned Christians being very motivated and so on. And they talked about all these nurture issues that Sam's discussing. So born that way, yeah, it was starting. You could see people saying, well, maybe people don't really change. It started, but it was later on. It was added later on. I don't know the exact dates, but you don't really see it until after decriminalization and after, and that's one thing, but after you get the more radical Gay Liberation Front campaigns, after Section 28 in the campaign that Stonewall spearheaded. So it's after the fact. And I think that's very interesting. And what's difficult in our culture now is for people like Sam to have the opportunity to actually see the literature. I mean, Sam, you actually found that literature online, but many people wouldn't want it to be available. So it's kind of bound up with campaigning. There's actually a century of therapeutic work talking with men and women with these issues in Britain and other countries. Talking, not doing silly things like electroshock. And there has been quite a bit of research, maybe the last 50, 60 years, I'd say.
Thanks, Carys. That's helpful. So it's all a very recent thing, saying this idea about being born gay. It's not. What we're saying is almost in line with history. So Sam, just to clarify, you have never been forced or pressurized in any way to seek to move away from these feelings. This is decisions that you have wanted to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it was. I wasn't even Christian. I wasn't even religiously motivated. I'm a Christian now, but it was purely, psychological information that I could not argue with, and years of experience. A lot of gay people or gay men, even many of the Christian gay men that are on this similar journey to me, they haven't even been in long-term relationships. They don't know what it's like. They're still out there looking for that perfect person in their mind that's going to rescue them. That perfect relationship. And what I experienced was finding who I thought was the perfect person. And this isn't the first time I've heard this. And realizing that the relationship itself is not fruitful relationship. And so yeah, I mean, when I found this information, it was actually Joseph Nicolosi, a popular psychologist and therapist, who worked in this field. He doesn't just describe, he doesn't just talk about mothers and fathers and how they treat their children and how it makes them gay, but he also he describes homosexuality as a symptom of a wider problem, which involves depression, poor sense of self. We know drug use, suicide, etc. All those kinds of things. Dissociation, and all these things that they're a symptom of a wider problem. And so it clicked for me, and I'd really struggled to understand what was going on, and of course then comes anger. I was very angry that this information had been hidden from me, and it felt like the media had been very manipulative, especially with popularity of people like Lady Gaga, who came around on the scene about 10 years ago, really kind of launching a campaign, a political campaign through pop music. I mean, that to me, that's sick now. I was a huge fan at the time. But yeah, no, I've not been coerced. I seek therapy because I think it's the right thing for me to do, and I'm enjoying it, and it's helping me a lot. And I'll look forward to the future. And it's an experiment. That's how I see it. I see it as an experiment to see if it works and what it does for me. And I'm enjoying it so far.
Thanks, Sam. Carys, we have this kind of this media, this kind of image of conversion, so-called conversion therapy is all about coercive practices, sending people who don't want to go to these camps, electric shock treatment, all this kind of stuff. And we'll talk a little bit with Sam about what he's kind of going through. But Carys, where's this image of so-called conversion therapy come from? And is it real? Does that stuff happen today?
There's a whole history. This campaigning goes back 50 years when Peter Tatchell went to a meeting of it was the London Medical Group, it was called. It was a group for ethicists or doctors who are interested in ethical disputes and to hear about controversial subjects. And they heard from two people who did electroconvulsive therapy treatment, psychiatrists, because it's psychiatrists who did it. And they were heard from Isaac Marks, who was a well-known psychiatrist, and Hans Eysenck, who was a very well-known psychologist, who's now dead, but he's very influential in psychology. And he wrote that up, and he went in and tried to disrupt. And of course, we only have his account. And what's frustrating when people talk about electroshock treatment is that you do have some scientific papers from the UK. And the people who wrote them wrote about their own patients are still alive, but they mostly won't give interviews to the press. So it's kind of difficult to evaluate, because can I just say that the one moral argument that people like Peter Tatchell have always made is that it's painful. But I can think of a lot of other things that wouldn't be good. Like if they're making people watch porn, for example, try and change their sexual attraction. That's obviously unethical. And yes, psychiatrists, it only lasted about 10 years in the UK, this treatment. They got it from treatment for alcoholism, which is totally different. But the other thing that strikes you when you read the papers of these, and I won't name them, the psychiatrists who wrote them up, but they're not interested in psychotherapy, let alone religion. They're not religious, they're not Christian. Their stated motivation was to help people fit in socially. Well, as Sam knows, so many people with same-sex attraction have tried and tried and tried, and they'll say, they'll say, I've tried to fit in socially, I couldn't. And so you can see why some people who've gone through this, they'll have varying reactions. But fitting in socially is not the same as helping your mental health. And treatment like this, which is based on trying to trigger change in behavior, is not the same as getting to know a person, which is perhaps what psychotherapy does, or let alone, religiously based Christian pastoral counseling from a pastor or a priest. So that's what I want to say, that they're quite different ethically. Yes. And so that's where this idea partly comes from. And you can see, I actually wish the activists would have been more broad in their moral criticism, but they just focused on the pleasure pain principles, which is kind of very narrow and was aimed to shock the public and the press. And the other thing is they bring back this shock story every 10 or 20 years. So we're in a period at the moment where they've been using it, but because it hasn't been used since 1975, I think it is in the UK, it's an argument that wears thin. That's what I would say about that. All the other types of thing, like it's legitimate to criticize that. I think Tom's got an argument about it, but the government. We heard this on Monday night's debate in Westminster Hall. They were also saying that things like rape, corrective rape is so-called, homophobic rape of lesbians, counts as therapy. Now, several of us from Christian Concerns have asked the government about this, and of course they backtrack when we're asked, because rape is a crime, and of course no therapist has or would recommend this or other honor-based types of violence as therapy. So the danger here is for somebody like Sam or many others is that the government, if they were to legislate, it's bad enough already, but if they were to criminalize like this, it would taint the word therapy. Do you see what I mean? Once you actually lie about what is and isn't therapy, that's going to affect all the mental health profession. So it's more than where does it come from, is what is the term conversion therapy functioning as? It's actually destroying our use of language and in the law and policy and in the media.
Thanks, Carys. Great to see some of the comments coming in. Katash Diaconia from Nottingham saying, amazing to hear. He describes himself as an ex-homosexual as well. I found Jesus in a new light, received the greatest love you can ever imagine, restored from rejection and more. It is good to hear another life-changing message. And some great comments here. David Snow, what a lovely man, an eloquent, honest and sensitive bloke. Matthew Grech, it's lovely to see you joining us. Some will know him from X Out Loud, a very good friend of the ministry, Christian Concern. Andrea Williams joining in as well. Great to have you with us. Sam, so you're going through some talking therapies. How has that been, and have you experienced change? Are you experiencing change?
Yes, I am experiencing change. I can say that for sure. It's a very slow process. And I sort of think of my life in two areas. I think of this process in two ways at the moment. I have therapy on one side, and on the other side, I have the relationships outside of therapy. Because at the end of the day, this issue I have is all about relationships. The therapy I do, I have found a therapist who he's Catholic, so he has he agrees with what we're doing. He plays a role of a father for me, and really, when I first met him, I had all of these years of turmoil that I had never had really expressed to anyone. Stuck inside my body and inside my mind. The average person is able to communicate their feelings to someone and discharge their frustrations and anger or disappointment or upset with their family or their friends, whatever. I felt, because of my condition, shall we say, throughout my childhood and throughout my 20s, there was so much pain, and I don't like to use that word lightly because it's a bit sensational, but there was so much pain that was stuck inside me, and really what he's done is he's provided this father figure for me, so I can just complain. I just complain to him about past memories. Tears come out. We have techniques we work on outside of therapy, and it's been so helpful just to unload, really. In that sense. But then outside of therapy, what I'm doing is trying to establish myself as a man among men, really. And that means, I mean, when I broke up with my partner two years ago, I didn't have any male friends. I had a small handful of female friends, and then I think I had a couple of gay male friends that I hadn't really spoken to in a very long time. And since then, I've now got I don't really speak to many female friends, but I have got a handful of male friends, and that is so helpful. It's really good for my heart, and good for my soul, and I'm on my way. But when it comes to change, the way I measure change is looking back and knowing what position I was in before, I have a much better sense of self, which I've expressed with X Out Loud in the video I did with them. But in terms of romantic and sexual attraction, I have moments where I am sexually attracted to women. And I obviously know we as Christians, you know, I can't just swap one sin for another. I'm talking about lust, obviously, but you know, those attractions have been there, and it's very much dependent on how I feel and what I've been doing, and my level of assertion. For example, I went to a conference where, you know, for people who wanted to discuss this particular topic, and I'd spent 3 days with a small group of men who were in the position that I was in, and we had so much fun. Well, I say fun, but we were just talking, you know, 3 days in a row about all this trauma that we'd experienced, and all that kind of stuff. And when I got off the plane, on the way home, I noticed that my body wasn't even reacting to men around me. I saw them as just people, but my body was reacting to women. And I know it sounds like maybe I'm jumping the gun, but that's, you know, to me, that was God's way of saying, you know, this is possible. You know, you can feel, you know, healthy attraction to women. And now you've just got to put in a bit more work. So I do have those moments. I've had several of those moments through the last 2 years. I think lockdown has really put a spanner in the works, but I do believe change is possible, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Thanks. That's, I mean, really helpful. And I don't know whether you'd articulate it this way, but it sounds more like, oftentimes people define what this is as just saying, oh, it's trying to be moved from gay to straight. But it sounds, in a sense, it's more about growing in manhood and becoming the man that God's really made you to be. Would that be an accurate way to describe that?
Yeah, definitely. Because homosexuality, what people need to understand is that, you know, the therapy I'm going through, yeah, you're right. It's not about sex and sexuality. The sexuality is a symptom of a broader problem. It's like a fracturing in the mind almost that needs to be patched up and mended through healthy relationships with men. You know, I use, you know, a big part of my sexuality is about boredom. I think I replace thinking about sex with men. Sorry to be explicit, but I replace thinking about that with thinking about, you know, sports. You know, I never did sports when I was a kid. I never had, you know, that time to be around boys and do sports, or, you know, do activities together. And now that's what I really crave. So I'm looking forward to doing that. But yeah, you're right. It's about growing as a man of God, and just learning to anchor myself with men.
Thanks. Really helpful. Rebecca Moffat has a question here. Some say conversion therapy is harmful because it teaches people to deny their true selves and suppressing real feelings. Do you feel like you're denying your true self by no longer identifying as homosexual? If not, why not?
That's a good question. I have felt like that at times, I must admit, because it's actually quite a stressful process at times. I say it's like, you know, drug addicts. They build their lives around drugs, getting drugs, sourcing drugs, taking drugs, where we're going to take drugs, you know, getting the money to buy drugs. And it's not necessarily about the drug itself, it's the life around it. So when you take drugs away from those people, it's not about the physical withdrawals necessarily, but it's about their lifestyle in general. And so, yes, that itself has been stressful. I mean, partly because I'm going against the grain, and this is not a mainstream idea. But I don't see it as suppression at all, because it's not about pushing something down. It's about taking these feelings and learning that they are a symptom of a deeper issue, and working with them. I mean, even if, let's say, a heterosexual sex addict, for example, their addiction, you know, their desire to use sex as an affect regulator is a psychological, emotional problem. And so you might help that person by helping them to establish healthy relationships. That's all I'm doing, really. I'm taking a symptom, I'm using it, and I'm filling it up with healthier things. And that's all therapy is, really. And that's all right, rehabilitation is. That's how I see it anyway.
I think it's very interesting listening to that, because a lot of the people who've pushed for the conversion therapy ban that already exists in the UK, we actually start looking closely at their careers and their papers. They also don't really like the label sex addiction in therapy, and they don't want acknowledgement of sexual addiction, which I think is telling. They won't make the connection explicitly, but we can tell they don't like it.
Mm.
And I think it was important that you mentioned there. I think in whatever issue it is, when we absolutize something and it becomes the key of our identity, but it's destructive or toxic to our lives, any form of counseling to that is going to be tough and is going to be stressful. You mentioned drug addicts. I'm sure Alcoholics Anonymous is a stressful time and it's a stressful process. But the point is that we encourage you to walk through it with grace and compassion and love. But it's amazing just hearing your testimony and your commitment to walking through that, and slowly and steadily. I think we do read that we're called to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and it's as our minds move away from what they used to think about, and I guess move on to how they should be, and to the things of Christ, as we're slowly conformed into his image, that these things begin to change in different ways. And it doesn't happen overnight.
I think the big thing as well for gay people as well is the LGBT identity. I don't know if the average heterosexual person has observed this, but a lot of it is about pop culture. And a lot of it is, what kind of media do you consume? What music do you listen to? We think of pop music as being gay. Sometimes we think of certain TV shows as being gay TV shows, that kind of thing. And I mean, that's testimony to the fact that it's an identity problem and not an inborn thing. But that is probably one of the things that in my process is a little bit harder to deal with. I mean, I don't know if that will change, but I forgot where I was going with that. I think I'm just trying to say that is something that makes people doubt as well. I think is that it's not just, it's, as I'm going through this process, I'm learning to let go of those identity markers like music and TV shows, but I'm not forcing myself. Some of those things just change naturally. I can't remember the point I was trying to make there, but I hope that makes sense to someone.
No, it does. It does make sense, and I guess in a sense, because I think there's a lot of criticism today of, kind of gender stereotypes, so to speak. But in some ways, and we don't draw hard and fast rules, I guess, on this, but sometimes that can be helpful. Maybe. When you said, for example, now a bit more interested in doing sports, for example, I think sometimes the narrative can come across, if you don't like sports, then you're gay, and it's like, it's okay to not like sports, but it's what you need to be doing is having those bonds with other men and other boys when you're growing up, and having those relationships.
Yeah, I think the point I was trying to make was that, if there's any gay people watching this or anything similar, the idea of change freaks them out because it is an identity thing. So there is so much change, so much goes into your identity, where you live, the furniture you've got, the car you've got, and then the music you listen to in the TV shows, and that stuff does change over time, but it's not something you need to suddenly abstain from and think everything's going to be fine, and you don't need to change. It's not an overnight thing.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about the mass culture. It's kind of pop culture is mass culture, and what is very noticeable. I mean, I'm older than you. I was in school when Section 28 was law, and I remember one teacher trying to break it, and knew about it. But is that what you gradually started to see in the 90s, really more. I noticed it because I was growing up and knew what homosexuality was. Is the scripting of coming out in the music industry, and then in soaps, in storylines, and that's gone on until this day, and it's gone on in more sophisticated ways with the media, with YouTube stars. So it's definitely an intentional process. It's not just a passive thing where yes, gays happen to like certain programs. It's an interactive process to create more fans, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, yes, Sam.
I was just going to say, I think it's a bit of both. I think there are things that appeal to gay people because of the interactions between the characters. I mean, gay men typically love things like Golden Girls. I mean, I don't know Golden Girls myself, but that's just an example I could think of off the top of my head, because they like seeing these women being, dominant and catty and messing around and stuff, because that's the environment that they know.
Right.
But at the same time, Carys, yes, you're right, that some TV shows do deliberately try to not only appeal to gay people, but also, I believe personally, to create gay people.
Yeah.
Which
Just
is
to appeal to teenagers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember in the 80s and 90s, I do not remember a lot of shows deliberately doing that, but it was starting, and then you had Stonewall with the Repeal Section 28 campaign, and there were lots of different things around that, and this was a soft way of doing it, a socially acceptable way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been in general a trend over the last few decades just to normalize and celebrate and introduce at a younger and younger age these kinds of issues to younger people. So you mentioned, Sam, there about how it's really become such an identity issue. I think we'd agree. We see this all around with the way Pride marches and things like that. In some way, this kind of gay identity has crept into the church somewhat, perhaps, or maybe you disagree, where it's often said, for those who are experiencing same-sex temptation, same-sex desires, it's said they shouldn't try to change, but should simply just pursue celibacy and learn to live with it. What would you say to that?
I respect that people, those people don't believe that they can change, and I think those types of people are the people I was talking about, where they recognize that to try and undergo that change is a big loss. I mean, there's a big gain in my eyes, but in their eyes, it's just a big loss, and they would lose a lot of who they are through a change of identity. But saying I'm celibate because I'm attracted to the same sex and that's a sin, so therefore I'm not going to do it, I think that's a path to I think they're setting themselves up for defeat, to be honest with you, because my experience of homosexuality is very well, not even my experience, but from the literature I've read, my understanding is that it's a very it's childhood needs that have gone unmet. And so if you're just going to put your hands up and say, oh well, I just won't act on these, you're still going to feel them. And like I said, it's not just sexual attraction, there are other symptoms to it as well. So I would encourage those people to just well, I mean, there's probably nothing I can say for them, but I personally don't believe celibacy is the answer. I think it's, there's a hole in your heart that needs to be filled, and I think celibacy is just not the healthiest way of dealing with it.
And I guess in one sense, this is simple sanctification and discipleship. It's not, in a sense, I think oftentimes people hear these labels and then they project all these kinds of things of, oh, I just need to, you're saying I need to attend these sessions and then I'm fixed or whatever. When reality is it's about that being transformed, in a sense, by God as we understand who He's created us to be. Of course, there's some, more secular counselors, but in a sense, they're borrowing from the Christian worldview, and it's about walking in who God's created us to be, and putting to death our sinful desires. As we were saying earlier about sex addiction, we wouldn't say you just need to live with that. We'd say you need to walk in healing and transformation and sanctification.
Yeah, because I've said it many times in today that it's a symptom. It's a symptom of a bigger problem, and there's no harm in just trying to explore that.
Yeah. So we're talking about this now, and just want to say, Sam, this has been amazing hearing your story, and it's just thank you so much for your bravery and your honesty and the rawness with all your sharing. We're talking about this in the context of a possible ban. Carys, could you maybe go into what for when people say ban conversion therapy? What are people talking about?
Well, it's interesting. I was just saying that the fallout from Monday night's debate, which was never going to have a vote, it was just debate in Westminster Hall in the House of Commons. The people we don't agree with, the ones who want a criminal ban, picked up on the fact that the government said in response, the Minister for Equality has turned up to the debate, and the government said, as it has been saying for a while, it's not that it's looking at a ban, although it said it is, but it's looking at ending conversion therapy. And they used to say, we want to end it and stop it from going underground. Now, end can't be the same as ban. Ban means passing a law. It's an act, it's one thing. But you can't really end talking with people. You can't really end praying with people. You can't end, you just can't. Or weekends away where men go together to socialize and bond and play sports, wherever. You can't end any of that. It's just ridiculous. And so this is why I question whether the government would criminalize. I think one thing I would say that our viewers need to understand is in that debate, and I've got an article that's going up this afternoon, one of the MPs who spoke gave an idea about how to criminalize. And she said, why not have protection order to protect vulnerable people, presumably young people, from what she said, the cultural and religious pressure to undergo conversion therapy, what that is. And protection orders, well, you already have them. You can go to court and get them for, to help somebody escape a forced marriage or, honor-based crimes. And there was actually a story in the news yesterday from India, which was reported in our press, about a young woman who was a lesbian, and parents basically wanted to force her to marry this man. But they also wanted her to undergo therapy. Now, that clearly is a situation of coercion. And as it turns out, the report said the man also didn't really want to be married. Well, funnily enough, it's a forced marriage. So, but my question there would be, the government needs to be really careful if it goes down that route. What does it mean by cultural or religious pressure? That's quite subjective. And so there's still a real danger that they're looking at those options, and that the government's turned a corner here. I mean, of course, forced marriage and other things are already illegal, and they've got special units in the government and people, especially trained caseworkers. But I would say this, if anybody in the government is watching, be careful. Don't mix up the language of conversion therapy, which is deceit and disinformation, with a well-established policy on forced marriage. That's going to create confusion in the government, in the Crown Prosecution Service, in the Home Office, the police, and among caseworkers. And I think it will annoy a lot of people when you create confusion. Don't do that.
Thank you, Carys, there. So yeah, it's a complicated issue, but it could have massive ramifications for us, particularly as Christians in the church. We've seen in Victoria, in Australia, where they've basically banned all counselling of even suppressions, or even calling for, even promoting celibacy can be deemed so-called conversion therapy.
Yeah.
So it's vital that churches and Christians speak into this. Sam, what would you say to Christians who are unsure about engaging on this issue and don't really know what to say?
It doesn't surprise me that they don't really know what to say, because a lot of Christians, unfortunately, are still relying on mainstream media to feed them with their sense of reality, which is really, it's a real shame. We're seeing more and more of that at the moment with the lockdowns. So it doesn't surprise me that they don't understand. I would just say, I don't know what I'd say. I don't know what I'd say.
But you'd encourage, I mean, you know, you're kind of going through this, you know, this ban that they're talking about would directly affect you.
Yes. So I would say, look, it's not just about therapy. It's about getting a foot in the door of the church and saying to people, you are not allowed to pray for people like me. And you're also not allowed to suggest that there is anything wrong with homosexual activity, and obviously that is going to start off a chain of events that will inevitably lead to further bans on all kinds of scriptural scriptural truths and preaching those truths.
No, yeah. Well, thank you, Sam, so much for sharing your story, and Carys for being here. And for all of you watching, I know this is controversial things, but hearing the stories of people who are going through it slowly, you know, we're not saying there's a golden bullet to these kinds of issues, but the point is, it's about faithfulness to God and discipleship and sanctification. And ultimately, and it's been great. We didn't go too much into how you came to know the Lord, Sam, but you think we'd all agree. I saw it written in the comments earlier, that comment, that statement by Augustine, you know, where he says, "My heart is restless until it finds its rest in God." And you know, he ultimately is the one who does. He is the great Father. He's the loving Father who chose us, who runs to us even when we've run away from him. When we're eating with the pigs and we come home, he's the one that runs to us, and it's his love and his grace by his Spirit that we're transformed and we're made into the men and the women that God has called us to be. And just to close, I'll read these words from 1 Corinthians 6 that I think really sums up what we've really been talking about. 1 Corinthians 6 from verse 9. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revelers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. We live in that tension between the now and the not yet, but we know that today God transforms lives. He washes us by his Spirit, and he conforms us into the image of his Son. And we know that for those, he predestined us to be conformed to the image of God, and those he predestined, he called, and those whom he called, he justified, and those whom he justified, he will also glorify. And we wait for that time, but today we cling to that truth as we're transformed by the renewing of our minds. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you so much, Sam and Carys, and tune in next time on Round the Table.
Thank you.